Before I even begin with the topic of the video, I'm going to offer some disclaimers. If you are sensitive to topics like sick children, disabled people, and needing carers to take care of you, fertility issues, getting pregnant, and just reproductive issues in general, I suggest that you just click away right now and come back next week because these are all topics that will be being discussed here. Also, a quick note to everyone that this video is going to be in 2 parts, so I'm sorry about the very abrupt ending. My memory card just couldn't handle everything I needed to say. And the last thing that I want to do is upset anyone. The whole purpose of me making this video is to help people because I don't know about you guys, but I'm one of those people that when I hear somebody talking about an experience that they've gone through that's similar to or the same as an experience that I'm going through, it helps me feel less alone, which helps me overall because when your mental health is better, your physical health is better. So I'm hoping that I can either help someone feel less alone in their struggle and their journey, or kind of an and/or, I guess, that if you have unintentionally or intentionally done or said something unkind to someone like me who's going through a journey similar to my own, that this will teach you a little bit better what we're going through and why you shouldn't be doing things like that. I also want to mention that I might not be as upbeat and crazy as I usually am in this video because it's extremely difficult for me to film this. I've been trying to film this since I started my YouTube channel. This was actually going to originally be the focal point of this channel, and then it kind of just changed as time went on. And it's the hardest thing I'm probably ever going to have to discuss here because I'm basically going to be taking you on my health journey. My personal physical health is not something that I generally talk about. I certainly don't talk about it with people I've never met before, and I rarely talk about it even with close friends and family. It can take, up to a year after something's happened before my friends and family even hear about it sometimes because I just have a hard time talking about it. I've come to terms with it. That's not the problem. The problem is the way others have reacted to my health. It makes me very scared to come out about it. I might even disable comments just because I really don't want to hear any of the unkind things people have to say about this because it's been hard enough already. So let's finally get into it. So right after my parents got married, they decided they wanted to have kids. Their original idea was to have 4 children, and they decided that they would spend the first couple of years of their marriage in freedom. They would travel and do whatever it is they wanted to do that they knew they couldn't do when they were raising children. And as soon as they were done, getting their jollies out, they would start buckling down and trying to have kids. So they did, they had fun, they traveled, they did their thing, and then they were like, okay, we kind of want to go on these adventures with little us's now. So they started trying and trying and trying, and a year goes by, and there's been absolutely no progress at all, not a hint of pregnancy. And they're like, okay, maybe we should start looking into potential issues we might be having. So they start doing some work on their own, trying to figure out what might be going on, and trying all the crazy tricks you hear about when you're trying to get pregnant. None of that's working either. Couple years after that go by, more and more and more, and they finally decide, let's go to a fertility doctor. Something's obviously wrong here because it's been a few years, we've tried everything, and nothing is happening. So they go in, and before we get too far into the fertility doctor, I want to put it out there that, I was born in the 80s. Science in the fertility field had only come so far, so the doctors really were doing the best they could trying to help them, but there was only so much they could do at the time. Basically, all they could do was test to see if the counts were right, Nobody was sterile. Everybody, based on sperm count alone and my mother's egg production and stuff, should have been able to conceive. So the doctor was like, okay, what we're going to try now is, and I don't want to go into too much detail because you guys didn't necessarily sign up for this part of it and I don't want to freak anyone out, but basically she had to have a little surgery where they peek in there and make sure nothing is really wrong. Again, they check, they even go inside her, they cannot find anything they deem wrong. So basically they just look at her and say, keep trying. It might not happen for you. We don't really know why it's not going to happen for you if it doesn't, but keep trying. And if it gets to a point where you can't handle anymore, maybe consider adoption. So 8 full years go by. No baby, no hint of a baby, no pregnancy at all. And they're heartbroken. They've been trying literally nonstop those 8 years. But they're like, we still really want to have babies. We still really want to raise kids. So they started looking into adopting a Korean baby. They had the papers in hand, the application to be considered for an adoption. And right then is when my mother finally becomes pregnant. She told me, when she told my grandmother and her sister-in-law, they barely believed her at first. They thought that she was pulling their leg. And she was like, no, I am seriously pregnant right now. No one could believe it because it had taken so long and everyone felt so bad for my parents because they tried so hard. Unfortunately, sick me happened pretty quickly. Basically, as soon as my mother started to show, and it got to the point where when you look on the ultrasound, you can see a little person shape, I started getting sick. But as I mentioned, medical science had only come so far at this point, so nothing was visible on the ultrasound. Nothing seemed to be visible in tests. All my mother knew was all of a sudden she would get really dizzy, really unwell. She would start bleeding profusely like she was miscarrying and just faint pretty much. And they were like, the baby's kind of not doing well. I was basically dying and I was gonna take her with me. And the doctor could only tell her, just stay laying on the couch, do not move for anything. You can get up to go to the bathroom and that's it. Your husband has to do everything else. But at the time, my dad had, only had his shop open for a few years. He's the president of his company. And he needed to be there all the time to make sure that everything went off without a hitch. And the bad thing about that was that he couldn't come home right away if something was happening. And he was about 20 minutes or so away from the house anyway, so even if something was an emergency, chances are the ambulance would get there before he did. But he still tried to come home a few times a day, make my mother some food, carry her up the stairs if she needed to actually get to the bed instead of just the couch, let the dogs out, all of that good stuff. He did his best. Later on in the pregnancy, for the second time, she has the bleeding issue where it looks like she's about to miscarry and we're both dying, the doctor says, and they're like, holy cow, this baby's gonna die. It's not gonna even have a chance to come out, this poor lady. Again, they just tell her, rest, don't do anything. Finally, the day comes, she's in labor. She said that she didn't have really any problems during the labor process. She was like, it was really easy. She didn't really feel any pain. Her contractions were no worse than a period cramp. It was really easy. She said that she practically just went, and I came out. And my weight was normal. My length was normal. Everything seemed fine. But she said that almost immediately, every single day, at the exact same time, I believe it was 6 o'clock in the evening on the dot, I would scream for an hour as a newborn baby every day at the exact same time. And this continued until I was, a self-aware little person. And she couldn't figure out why, and the doctors couldn't figure out why. They thought it was so weird that it was at the same time. No one could figure it out. And then I get to like the 1 and 2-year-old stage of my life, and I start having more problems. I'm getting sick really regularly, and At this time, I lived in kind of a city suburb, so there were a lot of different people around me, and my class size, even for preschool, was like, 30 kids, 15 to 30 kids, so I was always around a lot of people. So my immune system, by rights, should have been growing and strengthening by the day, but instead it seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. Every time a kid so much as sneezed in my general direction, I would get pneumonia and catch whatever they had, only to like a worse degree, have to go to the hospital. And even when I wasn't sick, something weird kept happening. My mother said from when I was a baby all the way through when I was like 2, 3 years old, I would get a 105-degree Fahrenheit fever with no other symptoms. I didn't have the flu. I didn't have a cold. I was fine. I was just really, really hot and really, really sore, and I would just freak out because I didn't know why I was hot and sore. And the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. My mother said she took me to multiple pediatricians. None of them could figure out why I would have a really high fever but not be sick. And it was getting to the point where she said that I was 2 years old. I'd never gotten to experience snow, even though I lived right next to Canada. I never really got to go outside because I was getting these fevers so often. So finally the doctors were like, well, let's take your kid's adenoids out because hopefully that will help with at least the fever part of the issue here. So they did. Unfortunately, it was a really traumatic experience, but that's for another video. The doctors were bad. We'll leave it at that for now. And they took them out. I had my little recovery, went back to school, still the same shit. The fever itself didn't happen as frequently anymore, but my immune system was still worthless. I still would catch everyone's illness, but to a worse degree. But my parents decided, since that was the only thing going on with me, I didn't have any physical impairments or anything at the time, I would just stay in normal school and be as normal a kid as I was able to be. I feel like, to some degree, my parents must have known that I wasn't always going to be okay, that something would happen to me eventually, just based on how sick I was as a child. So from a young age, they exposed me to people who were disabled. Disabled people never really bother me for a couple reasons. One being that my uncle, very, very close to me, always has been, has burn scars. Has burn scars on 80% of his body, and I've known him literally since I came out of my mother. So I've been around him so often that he is my normal. I am not really capable of seeing it as anything but normal because I'm so used to being exposed to it. So stuff like that never bothered me. And like I said, I was in a city suburb, so there were people of all different ages and different types around me. I would go to Pizza Hut and see little girls who were special needs. I'd ask my mother questions, and this is where all that disability positivity type of feeling came from. I would ask questions about someone who was disabled when we were out in public, and my mother would allow me to ask those questions, and she would turn to either the carer of the person or the person themselves, depending on what they were able to manage, and see if they would like to answer the question, because obviously she didn't know all the details, and those people generally appreciated the fact that my mother was letting me ask these questions and letting me learn about different people. And so again, that made that kind of thing very positive for me. Fast forward a long while, I am in high school and my physical capabilities are getting worse and worse. It's getting to the point where I'm starting to need mobility assistance. It's getting to the point where I am in with doctors all the time, in hospitals fairly frequently, and again, this is for other videos, but I was suffering from severe depression at the time. Having depression and not being able to move well and being in pain not a good cocktail. Nobody wants that cocktail. And so my mother noticed that whenever I was in 4-H, I would see the special 4-Hers, which are obviously special needs people who had their own club. And she noticed that I felt really happy when I was around them. So she was like, why don't you go and say hello? So I went to this little pavilion they were in one year and just introduced myself. I told them that I had some background with special needs people because I had a couple of friends with severe cases of autism in school that, you know, were like nonverbal and stuff, but that was really the only exposure I'd ever gotten. And they were all very kind to me. I started working with them. I started becoming a volunteer in Special 4-H. And the people there, the volunteers, they did the best that they could, but most of them were just trying to be helpful. They didn't really know what to do. And somehow it was like a natural instinct in me. I just knew how to care for individual people. So I went from just being, you know, the volunteer that gives them the crafts or their snacks to being borderline a carer, where I would help them in the bathroom, I would help them with their dietary needs, I would help them with everything. And I started realizing it really was making me happy. It was pulling me out of those depressive states. Even on the worst days of my depression, all I had to do was be around these people, and it was like it just dissipated in that moment in time. So I realized that my school had a program called Tech. Basically, you would attend regular high school for 3 hours, either in the morning or afternoon. It was your choice. And then you'd get on a bus for the other 3 hours, and you would go off campus to basically a vocation type school where you could get certified, which means you already earned some of your credits for college, which was awesome. And one of the vocations was a school for severely handicapped children. Only one other person in my entire high school was interested in going to this school, and I knew right away it was what I wanted to do. I went in. When I got there on my first day, the lady in charge told me that for the first 2 weeks she was going to put me in a different room every day, and after those 2 weeks I could tell her which room I was most comfortable in. So I did, and at the end of the second week, she stopped me in front of this door and she says, I'm just going to warn you right now, no one really ever wants this room. This is the most difficult room. These children have really severe cases of whatever their handicap is. Most of them mentally will not be able to progress beyond age 2. They literally need everything done for them. And I was like, I'm here for it. I'm ready, let me in. And of course, after one day, I was in love with the kids. That was the room I chose. That's where I wanted to be. And it was true. They were like 14-year-old little babies. I mean, they needed everything. You had to spoon feed them, you had to do their diapers, you had to help them into their wheelchairs if they had a wheelchair or walking device, you had to help them do gross motor skills by pushing weights through the hallways and stuff, you had to help them in gym class. They had a really difficult time performing any function on their own, and again, I was so happy. The kids loved me, I loved them, and I very much became their carers. I even became carers to one of the kids outside the school, and I loved it. It made me so, so happy. And I ended up realizing that is what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a carer to people with special needs. There was a program around my house that was called respite care, where basically for 40 hours a week, you would take over the care of someone's very, very disabled relative, mentally and physically disabled, and you would take care of them. You were allowed to take them off site. You were allowed to like take them to theme parks and zoos and whatever you wanted to do with them. They were yours for those 40 hours. And I was like, this is amazing. This is like my dream. I can't wait to do this. And of course, right when I finally got enough qualifications that I was filling out the application for respite care is when my health took the biggest shit of my lifetime and I started literally dying. Something a lot of people don't understand about my health is the fact that technically, although I've been sick since I was a baby, things were very gradual. until they weren't. It was a very slow uphill battle, and then once I got to like my late teens and early 20s, it just went bam, out of the blue. Everything just fell apart. It went from, oh, you sometimes need a cane once in a while, and sometimes you have some pain too. I'm in so much pain every day, I can't get out of bed, I can't eat, I am on an all-liquid diet. I couldn't do anything for myself. I had to be picked up and carried to the car to go to the hospital. It was awful. And a lot of this stuff ended up becoming permanent. I needed multiple surgeries. I needed to go on special diets, and slowly but surely it made its way to where I am right now, and I can't care for people anymore. I can't even volunteer in Special 4-H anymore because I need so much help. I generally need people to help me with my food, with getting the food, with preparing the food, if I can even eat that day, if not preparing me a shake in the blender. I need help getting across the house sometimes, or getting in and out of the car. I need help sometimes with even getting to the bathroom or the shower. There's no such thing as privacy anymore. Everyone's been everywhere at this point. On my worst days, I need help with everything, and even on my best days, I still need help with anything that deals with moving, because I either need my walker or I need my wheelchair. And it's been really weird for me over the last few years trying to come to terms with the fact that I used to be a carer. I used to be the person taking care of somebody else and making sure their life was easier, and that I can no longer do that, that now I'm the one that needs to be taken care of. I'm the one that needs someone to make sure I'm okay all the time and to make my life easier. And it's a weird feeling going from one side of the spectrum to the other, especially as quickly as I did. And for a while it made me really sad. It made me sad that I knew I couldn't take care of other people anymore in that way. It made me sad knowing that I had to effectively become one of the clients I used to help. But at the same time, I came to this epiphany one day, and it was soon after my most recent major surgery, that me going from being a carer to needing carers in my life doesn't mean anything bad. It doesn't mean anything really negative about me as a person. I'm not broken. I'm not somebody who's a burden on someone else. Those people have signed up for that life. They've signed up to take care of me and make sure I'm okay every day. And I'm still just as capable and useful as I was before, just in different ways. Something that I discovered for myself was that rather than sitting on the couch all day feeling sorry for myself about the fact that I need carers now instead of being one, is every time my disabilities progressed, every time I discovered that I could no longer do something that I used to be able to do, I would immediately strive to replace that with something else. So, for example, when I realized I really can't even easily walk across the room by myself anymore most of the time, I replaced walking and running, skipping, all that stuff you do with your legs, with a new hobby. I discovered game systems. I'd never had one as a kid, and I discovered that I really love playing games. So as soon as the slightest hint of sadness about the fact that I can't walk around easily anymore enters my mind, I immediately turn on a game and start gaming and having fun. I get physically tired very easily, but somehow, for the most part, my dominant arm does okay. So if I'm in the middle of doing housework or something and I discover that I'm getting just too winded, I have to stop for the day, I can't do anything, if I just try to sit on the couch and do nothing, I'm going to go crazy. It's just not my life. I can't handle it. So instead, I just sit down and I pull up a YouTube video on how to paint in a certain way, and I start painting. I did the same thing with knitting. When I found another thing I couldn't do, I replaced it with knitting. I've discovered all these things that I can do that I never knew I could do before, that I wouldn't have learned I was able to do had I not become handicapped, because before I was handicapped, I was too busy to learn that I was capable of doing these things. And that's what I learned about going from being a carer and trying to teach those people that there's always a positive side of life to becoming someone who needed one. I needed to take my own advice that I used to give to my clients. I needed to learn that there's always positive aspects of life no matter what you're going through, and you can find things that make you happy if you look for them. And I'm glad that I learned that from myself, and that's why I'm happy that even though it was hard, I went from one side to the other, because I had to learn to take my own advice.